Okay, hello, 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 and welcome to week three. I think we're in week three of of school and society, and I am going to go ahead and lecture about the things that I forgot to record last week, and then we're going to get into the topic for this week. So we're going to start off with a recap of the birth of the principalship. If you read the Go to the Principal's Office article. And we have Julie with us here today and anybody else who cares to join. But if you go to the Go to the Principal's Office article, it basically does like a brief overview of, just trying to get myself situated here, a brief overview of kind of like how the principalship came about. Basically, as we saw from both the videos that we watched last week and reading the article, schools used to be like a one-room schoolhouse type organization. And there may have been a head of school that was over like one or two teachers, but as schools grew out of the common school era, schools emerged from these really small one-room schoolhouses to these multi-classroom structures, institutions, and later districts. And so as the size of the actual school building grew, there became a need for people who could oversee the building, oversee the teachers, and that person became the principal. So this is the late 19th century. As we moved into the 20th century, um, and there was like an introduction like the industrial boom and like seeing things through like the age of like Fordism and the factory era. Excuse me, I'm sorry. My little thing is distracting me. Um, but the factory era of um of schools become there was a need for schools to become run more organized in a more organized way, kind of like a business or another kind of organization, right? So schools began to look to businesses for their organizational theories so they could understand how to be more effective and more efficient. And as they began to look to the business world to see how to become more effective and more efficient, then they also um, began to have these same kind of similar distinctions like there were in the business world. So in a factory, you have like the factory workers, you have the middle managers, and you have the owners, right? So as the principalship began to rise, you had the teachers who were like the factory workers, and the middle management became like the school leaders, and the principals and the owners or such and such would be like the superintendent. And as that happened, professionalization of the role of principal through stronger academic qualifications led to more responsibilities and subsequently more prestige. So, um, for the most part, during this time, the principal was just a person who kind of passed down the information from the superintendent or whoever was over like all of the schools in the district. And it wasn't really so much about instructional leadership. That's why you may have seen, like in your era when you grew up, the principal was the high school coach, the former high school coach, you know, because it wasn't about this notion of like being an instructional leader. It was about being a building leader, like running the school properly, making sure people got to lunch on time, they got out of school on time, all the classes were covered, and the teacher was left to be like the instructional leader. But it kind of led to like some inconsistencies from classroom to classroom, and there was no cohesion across the buildings. So, as we, particularly at the end of the 20th century, as we saw the need for cohesion across the buildings, we began to look at principals and their leadership type and how they could become better at leading their buildings versus just being a manager of the building. So this is where we introduce leadership theories, right? So you have this notion, like the four that we're going to talk about here, is the kind of leaders that we tend to encounter. This comes from like business organization studies, right? So we have four types of leaders: the great hero leader, the behaviorist leader, the situational leader, and the transactional/transformational leader. So, what is a great hero leader? That's the kind of leader or the theory that subscribes to the fact that um, people are born to be in a role. They're not made, they can't be created, right? You were born to lead a school or you are not. right? And like if you have like that charm and that charisma, then you should be a school leader. And if you don't, then stay in the classroom. And then there's the behaviorist theory towards leadership. Anybody can become a leader. All you have to do is acquire X, Y, or Z skills. So leaders are made if you do these things or this thing. If you hold one-on-ones, if you do 360s and all the other stuff that we say makes a good leader, right? And then there's a situational leader where a leader kind of rises out of the context. Maybe they don't see themselves as a leader. Maybe other people don't see them as a leader, but there's a time and a place and someone needs to step up and they do, you know? And so, but when the crisis or the situation passes, then they might go back to their normal role, right? And then there's the one that's the most popular, I would say, these days. It's kind of like the notion of the transformational leader. So the transformational leader is like the opposite of the transactional leader. The transactional leader is a person who's like, you do this for me, I'll do this for you. Very much so quid pro quo, right? But a transformational leader is a person who inspires people to be and find a leader within themselves. And they're about transformational change. So it's not about like necessarily hitting targets, but it's like ever increasing and ever improving um outcomes, right? So if you're familiar with some of the early 21st century like organizational books like Good to Great, we think about like Ford or rather GM. I'm from Detroit. Don't tell anybody I got that mixed up. Um, GM and how they transformed the whole company, by having this ever improving outcome kind of notion. And that's what a lot of schools and school districts and even education policy adopted within the last 25 years. It's like the cycle of improvement. It's like continuous improvement. You're never ever there because there's always something you can work on. And the only way you can get there is if you have a leader who understands that people are the ones who make the change. And so their leadership is complex, it's not one dimensional, and it's also very relational because they really depend on the people who they're leading to make the actual changes. They don't take on the burden of the change themselves. And so again, as we're thinking about um, schools and how they came from like these little one-room schoolhouses to these big, massive buildings that we see today, my high school was like 8 floors, right? And I'm sure we've seen schools like that all over Indiana. Um, there began the need to look at schools not necessarily as just places where kids go to get educated, but how are they operating as organizations? And so again, looking to the business world, we look to organizational theories that began to crop up during the industrial era in the early 20th century to see how we could improve schools. So, why do schools need to be improved? A lot of reasons. In the early 20th century, it was because business leaders wanted better workers. And if they were coming out of school with X amount of education and they weren't able to go into the workforce and do the things that the business leaders wanted, then there was a demand. There's a um there's a study, I can't remember, but I believe it was done in Indiana, uh, like really, or like 1919 or something like that. And it looked at how the business owners at that time put pressures on the school leaders to produce certain kind of workers. And then once I think about it, I'll post it in a group. But um, yeah, it was really interesting that even as early as like the early 1900s, people were like, we need this kind of worker and we need to be coming out of a school. And then remember in the video, in the mid 20th century, when we were in the arms race in the Cold War, and Russia got Sputnik up in the air before we did, up in space, then it became like schools need to educate kids for STEM, 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 STEM. So there was this push for that. And if they weren't, they wanted to understand why they weren't, why our kids were falling behind, and Russia was able to get a spaceship up sooner than us. And then, of course, the civil rights movement created a demand for equality in schooling, and it inspired all of these other movements. And we'll be talking about those as the semester goes on. But like the disability rights era, more rights for girls, um, indigenous rights, immigrant rights, non-English language learner rights. Like all of that came out and was happening around the same time from the mid 20th century until about the end of the 20th century, around 1980s, 1990s, and we saw this push for accountability. And accountability era was like this demand for higher test scores, no child left behind, if you lived through that. Um, and so, especially during the accountability era, there was a huge emphasis on looking at businesses to see what they were doing to increase profits. But we know the kids are not like profits, but it didn't stop them from looking there anyway. So here's a video in the slides. I'm not going to show this video because you should have seen it in the School of the Public of American Education, but it's in episode 4, if I'm not mistaken, and it specifically talks about the reform era. So if you want to go back and watch it, this will be linked on the pages um, on in Canvas. Okay. So again, the focus on schools as organization was so that we can improve them. Why organizational theory? Because just like businesses, schools are structured and schools are purposeful. Schools are bureaucratized. You know, there's a hierarchy. Somebody's in charge, somebody's in charge of one thing and another. You have to answer to it. You can't just walk into a school and walk into a teacher and expect for them to have all the answers. There's certain people that have certain roles. And that's a specialized labor. And they're hierarchical environments, just like businesses are. And so the theories, organizational theories that we look at explain how schools work and how they can be improved. And it helps us to understand and diagnose different problems. So let's say teacher morale is low, right? Which happens sometimes. So teacher morale is low. How do we improve morale? Well, we know that if in the business, if morale is low, what have they done to incentivize more productivity? Because the outcome for all businesses is for their workers to be as productive as possible so they can increase their profit margins. Our outcomes is so we can increase like, test scores and other educational outcomes. But if your workforce is not motivated, then you're going to have problems, right? People call out and the test scores might not be what you want them to be, and other kind of issues. They quit. You have to like hire people because you have a shortage of staff. So by looking at what organizations do, you can solve that problem. That if you, I'm okay, I'm not trying to age anybody, but when I started teaching in the mid 90s, there was a dress code for teachers, like a strict, but it was a pretty accepted dress code. And then, just like from the business world, we introduced casual Fridays. I remember when casual Fridays you could not wear jeans to school. And so that was something they borrowed from the business world to try to increase motivation for teachers because teachers would come to school and if their attendance were a certain way, just like we do with kids now, they could wear jeans, which is like a huge deal to wear jeans to school. Now, teachers have a very different dress code. And again, that's also from the business world. If you think about places like Google or Microsoft or like Facebook, and it's super ultra casual, and people don't sit in traditional chairs. It's just very different. So we look to those organizations who seem to be like leaders in the business world to see what we can implement into the educational world. And understanding the theory helps us to understand and improve leadership practice. So as a school leader, you need to understand like, am I a transactional leader? Am I a hero leader? Like what kind of leader do I see myself as? Am I a transformational leader? So I can do the work that it takes to do to be a school leader because it's hard. Okay, so now we're going to talk about a little bit about these different organizational theories. So, classic organizational theory, it is like organizations are machines, and the emphasis on efficiency and increased productivity, right? You go in, you clock in, you at your station at a certain time, you do X, Y, Z things. We know we're gonna get. XYZ outcome. It's like the cog, you're the cog in the wheel, right? And the focus is on bureaucratic management. The assumptions are that um, behaviors are very rational and there's one best way. And if everybody does it this exact same way, we'll get the exact same outcome. That is very much so from the factory mindset. You know, if you think about factories, there needed to be a standardized way so that the car will come out the same way every single time, so that the iPhone will come out the same way every single time. And so that's what classic organization theory is. We tried that in education. It doesn't quite work that well because, children don't come out the same way every single time. So when you think about classic organizational theory, it's very top down. Like there is a person in charge and they are in charge. Um, there's a focus on productivity and project management and rules and very clearly defined division of labor. And that doesn't always translate very well into education settings. Now, I will say that there are some schools that are run this way, but when there's a hiccup, there's a hard time trying to figure out what to do when there's a hiccup. And then you have the neoclassic organizational theory, and that's both formal and informal forms of organizations within organizations. So, an example of a formal form of an organization would be a professional learning community, right? That's a formal organization within a larger school organization. An informal one would be like you and your best teacher friends. Y'all get together and y'all do things together, right? You might plan together. You might send each other students who are troublesome. This is kind of like your informal group, but it's still an informal organization. And in neoclassic theory, it was a rise of human relations and human-centered understandings of organizational behavior. Organizations are not machines. Organizations are filled with people. How can we make it better for people? What do people need? How can we make it comfortable so they want to come in and do their jobs? If there's a complaint, instead of just going straight to the big boss, you go to the HR person, and hopefully the HR person can solve it. Because we know that people don't always act in a rational manner. People, they do what they do, and it depends on the day, the week, what's going on in their lives. And the outcomes can be different from year to year because life happens to everybody. You might be going through something really like catastrophic, like the death of a loved one, or the dissolution of a major relationship, like a marriage, or something good, like the birth of a child, or, getting married, or things like that, buying a new house. All of these major stressors cause you to perform your job differently. And humans are motivated by many things, not just money. And that is the absolute truth when it comes to education. Because if we knew how much money we were not going to make being in education, would we even be here? Okay, so the legacy of neoclassic theory is that, again, the rise of human relations and understanding of human beings as capital inputs. When we think of capital, we think of like money and other kinds of investments, building the infrastructure, but understand that you need to invest in your people as well to make your organization better. There's emphasis on multiple forms of motivation, like the dress down Fridays, earning time off, signing bonuses and things like that. And it's also, we saw in neoclassic theory, the rise of shared goals and shared governance, where nobody's necessarily over anybody, but we all have to come to consensus before we do something else. And the emphasis is on the work environment and the work culture. And you start having conversations about what is the culture of this organization? What is the culture of this building? What is the adult culture? What is the kid culture? All that stuff came out of neoclassic organization theory. Now, in modern organization theory, we understand that organizations are complex systems and they are not static. And what happens in the teacher's classroom could vary from day to day. And we don't even understand that. Sometimes it's called like the black box. Like teachers go into their own little black box and they close the door and magic happens. And then some kind of way, these different outputs happen. But the emphasis on the context dependent strategies. If this, then that, right? Because we've seen that even in the way that we like interact with strangers coming to the building. Dr. Monahan had a guest speaker this past weekend, if you were in that class, where he talked about school safety, right? And all of the if then variables that one has to consider when we're trying to keep ourselves safe. And that's a part of modern organizational theory. Yes, you can have an app, but what if you have weak Wi-Fi in your building, right? So all of this stuff is like a lot of those if then scenarios. Um, and then there's this notion that organizational culture leads to certain and specific organizational behaviors. And certain and specific organizational behaviors lead to certain specific organizational cultures. Like they are not separate from one another. They're often mutually reinforcing one another. Organizations are interdependent, interconnected, and continuous improvement is a goal that will allow the organization to stay competitive. In Indiana, we see the rise of like the voucher movement, right? And in my research is mostly on school choice, right? So in school choice movement, there's this whole notion that just like a business, if the school does not produce specific kinds of outcomes, i.e., high test scores, high graduation rates, high college scoring rates, high people going into like business, then they need to move over to let somebody else do it. So now people are competing for students, whether it's a charter school or a private school or a magnet school or a public school. That is out of modern organizational theory, you know, the survival of the fittest business, and then market-based competition. Like I said, we're in the modern organizational theory era, but what does that mean for you as a school leader? That means that you're going to be competing for students, right? Even if it's just you're in a small rural district and it's just a private school, you're competing for students, from that private school. Also, there's this emphasis on continuous improvement. So when we think about school and society and we think about our role in there, there's an expectation that we're always going to be getting better, that our schools are always going to be improving. That is not enough for us to get the A grade. We need to get the A grade and X amount of students doing certain things. And if you're not there, or if most of your students are there, how can you get all of your students there? And if you're not there, what are you doing as a school leader to achieve those outcomes? And so in this modern organizational era, you have to ensure that people are working together for the end goal and you're understanding what makes a school tick, right? And this is where we also see more emphasis on being mission driven and having a vision, and that's where we see that because that's what the best companies do, right? The best company has a mission, the best company has a vision, the best company has like quarterly output and things like that. And we borrow a lot of that language when it comes to school continuous improvement. So here's a concept I want to go over. You don't really have to know this, but it's just kind of good if anybody brings this up. So the notion of like tightly coupled versus loosely coupled systems, if you think of schools as a system. So in tightly coupled systems, what happens in one part of the organization deeply impacts and profoundly affects another part of the organization. If you think about the factory, if the little cog that makes, I don't know anything about cars, the little cog that makes the engine go is missing and it has to be put in a certain era at a certain time in the assembly line. And if that doesn't happen, then you can't finish the rest of the engine. That's what a tightly coupled system means, right? Everything breaks down if this one little cog is not inserted at this exact point. Schools don't work like that, really. They're a loosely coupled system. What happens in my classroom might impact what happens in somebody else's classroom, but normally they don't, you know? So it doesn't really matter. So and so because schools are loosely coupled, it's hard to understand what really makes a school effective. We also had I hope this was recorded because we had a really incredible speaker also on Saturday, and he was a National Principal of the Year. And one of the things that he learned, one thing that I picked up on was that he was very much so focused on leadership and developing leadership in not only himself, but his teachers, his staff, and his students. So his whole focus was really on how to be a transformational leader and how to teach other people to do that, right? A leader of leaders. And he talked about that if you set goals, shows that if you set goals for your organization and it's like one or two, you have an 80% chance of reaching those goals. If you set more than two goals, that chance of reaching that goal drops to like 50. And the more goals you set, the less likely you are to hit them, right? And so that's where like organizational theory becomes like useful because like if you're a school leader or district leader, and you have a goal of a certain kind of outcome and it's like too many, you're not going to reach it. But if you're a district leader, and you set a goal and it's like two things, you just want two things to happen, because we know that schools are loosely coupled, we have to be very intentional about the way we set forth those goals so that it is consistent across all the people who will be impacting that outcome. Like I said, they're loosely coupled. And so also because schools are loosely coupled, a lot of times when there's problems in schools, people want to take a technical change. And a lot of times what needs is an adaptive change. So what is a technical change? A change of a system, a change of technology, a change of inputs. Kids are acting up on the bus, putting the adult on there and suspend kids off a bus. That's a technical change, but it does not address the root cause. Why are kids acting up on the bus? Are they uncomfortable? Are they sleepy? Are they overstimulated? And that's an adaptive change. Adaptive change is they address changing hearts and changing mindsets. And that's what you want to do as a leader. Identify what is the thing that needs to be changed. Because a lot of times we chase after technical changes. Oh, this better block system, block schedule. Oh, this better planning system. Oh, this better PA system. Oh, this better discipline system. And it doesn't change anything. Sometimes it makes things worse. So um, and then because schools are so loosely coupled, like I said, the changes have to go across the system in order to be effective. Because you can tell, and we've seen it before, a teacher like, hey, we're about to implement this new curriculum. And the teacher gets a new curriculum, and teacher's like, I've been teaching this, I'm gonna put it up. And then if someone comes in to check on me, I'll pull out the book. But for the most part, I'm keep doing what I'm doing. That's what happens in a loosely coupled system. So that's why you need adaptive changes so that everybody is on board with the changes. So you're not just top down, you're just going to do this and people don't feel great about the changes. You want to change hearts and minds and have people really believing in you and believing in the things that you're suggesting. So adaptive changes are super hard. They're hard to implement and hard to manage because how do you measure if somebody's mindset is changed, right? Because people can say anything to you. So you need a framework, some kind of framework to manage the change. And frameworks provide a guiding change process to help to lead school improvement. In your other courses, hopefully you've already talked about like the change process. We don't talk about the change process so much, but there is a framework I am going to introduce that I believe is being adopted in Indiana. I became familiar with it in the last couple of years here in Illinois. I still live in Illinois. I haven't moved over to Indiana yet, but it is supposed to be a framework for guiding continuous improvement that allows the school leader this constant self-reflection, right? And we know like the circle of change is like plan, do, I don't remember the other ones, but y'all know what I'm talking about. You plan, you do, you reflect, plan, implement, reflect, something else, and then you go back to planning again. And I can't remember exactly what it's called. Um, but it's like this notion of like continuous improvement. So this one that we're doing is called the school leadership paradigm. And it's like becoming the leader while you're doing the leadership work. And I like this paradigm because you're not required to have all the answers and be perfect and like have everything like squared away before you actually step into the role, which is useful for some of you who are already in a role. Like some of you in this class are already principals or you're assistant principals, um, and you might be asked to step into a you like things happen, right? And so you don't have to necessarily wait until you have every single duck in a row. You plan, you implement, you start here with a plan, you implement, you assess, you reflect, and it helps you to inform your next plan. So it's this whole loop of like continuous improvement that helps you become a better leader. So instead of going in a circle, you think of it like a cyclone where you're just getting higher and higher and higher. So part of this school leader paradigm is the notion that in order for it to be effective, you have to like really be a part or really buy into the transformational leadership change process. And like I was just talking about a few minutes ago, in transformational leadership, you don't just come in and you bark orders. You have a clear vision and mission for your organization, and those that mission and that vision influence your goals, right? And then you define a problem of practice, like those two things that you can focus on. You define one, and you figure out a key problem of practice, a linchpin that you think is going to make a huge difference by just a few little tweaks. Not something that demands an overhaul, not something where you have to campaign for like many, many months. Just a little problem of practice that you think is going to have a huge impact. How do you figure out what's going to be your problem of practice? You are in the data and you make a data-driven decision, right? And then you continue to make data-driven decisions to make sure that you are moving towards your goal. And in transformational leadership, there's an emphasis on culture. The principal who spoke to us last week talked about the culture. He did not mention the fact that it was a leadership heavy culture, but that's definitely something I picked up on. But he did mention the fact that culture is like it was a quote that says culture eats systems for breakfast, right? You can have the best system in place, everything minute by minute, and then here come little Peter in the classroom, and your whole system is gone, right? Unless you have like these these cultural norms. Like we don't do that here. We do this here. And then when your culture is solid, you can put the systems on top of it. And transformational leadership has high expectations for all the adults and all the children in your building. And it's also intellectually stimulating for the adults. It's not just read this script and then we're going to have this really great outcome. It's like involving like your teachers and seeing them as leaders and seeing them as people who can like contribute to the change that you're wishing to see. And you develop structures and systems to foster participation in school systems. A lot of times people opt out and they check out, and 3 o'clock, I'm out, deuces, you know. But you want to create a culture where people are really deeply invested in making sure that whatever our mission and vision is what we achieve. I remember when I was working in my first charter school, like we stayed late. We didn't get paid extra. We did whatever we thought we need to do to um, to get the outcomes. We had a very clear vision, and it was a very mission-driven organization. We didn't have good systems, so so we didn't get the outcomes that we wanted. And we're very surprised that we didn't get the outcomes that we wanted because we didn't realize that we needed very good systems for a lot of stuff. And it wasn't very intellectually stimulating for the adults, but we felt like we were doing something because it was fun and all this other kind of stuff. But we didn't have a problem of practice clearly defined that we worked towards. It was a lot of goals that we tried to work towards, and we didn't hit any of them. So, what is a problem of practice? We hear this being talked about a lot. And a lot of people have a lot of different definitions for problem of practice. For the purposes of our class, because for your last project, you're going to define a problem of practice in your action plan and you're going to try to like come up with a solution for it. And it's a very short action plan. It's not going to be multiple, not like 10, 12 pages. Like 3 to 5 pages, like something real short, because we only have one semester, and you're gonna find like a small problem of practice that you think is gonna make a huge difference. So, in order for us to be on the same page, we need to have the same definition for a problem of practice. So, what is a problem of practice? A problem of practice is a persistent issue within a specific professional context that requires improvement, where the solution isn't readily apparent and where focused action can lead to better outcomes. A lot of times, what I've seen when working with students, when they're thinking about a problem in practice, like naming a persistent issue is easy. Like, come on, we could name like five off the top of our head right now. But it has to be within a professional context. So it has to do with the adults, not with the children. So a lot of times when we think about problems in practice, we start naming issues with the kids. You know, kids don't line up properly, kids don't dismiss properly, kids aren't quiet, a lot of times they're that way because it's something the adults are or are not doing. I've spoken frequently about this notion of like kids acting up on the school bus. Well, if there's no adult on the bus, kids are going to act up. And you can kick them off the bus and you can demerit them and you can, if there's no supervision, if there's no adult, we know that there's going to have a specific kind of outcome. And if you don't, and if you look at that as like, oh, we just need to train the kids to have better attitudes and better behavior management and better self-control without addressing the obvious thing is like, but they're children and children are going to behave as children do, then you're going to just be chasing the tail all the time without any improvement. Now, let's say you do have um, a person on the bus, but there's consistent complaints about the behavior on the bus, right? Then you're going to look at it. What is it that the adults that are doing? Because they're the professionals. They're the ones who are paid to be there, hopefully. Um, and that becomes then a professional issue that you could work on. Maybe it's the language. Maybe it's the expectations. Maybe the adult is falling asleep on it. Like we don't know, right? But you can look at it and say maybe they just need more training on how to de-escalate situations. I don't know. You don't know. But you look at the data and maybe it's like so keep it one with this thing with like the bus. Let's say you have two bus aides, but they're not on this bus every single day. Like bus aide A is on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Bus aide B is on Monday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Other ones on Tuesday and Thursday. The kids act up every Wednesday, every Wednesday, but they don't act up on Monday and they don't act up on Friday. But they act up every Wednesday. But they don't act up on Thursday, Tuesday, and they don't act up on Thursday, just Wednesday. Okay? That doesn't make sense. The answer is not readily apparent. We have to do some investigating to figure out what is going on. It's a persistent issue. It's been going on for weeks. The bus driver's complaining. Parents are complaining, because kids are getting hurt. What are the professionals doing that makes Wednesday kind of a loosey-goosey day versus the other days? So it's a problem. Some outcome that you do not want or you do not desire, that makes it a problem, right? So kids yelling out in class, I wouldn't necessarily call that a problem, but if it's like really disruptive, then it's risen to the level of a problem. Practice adult behaviors that lead to that outcome. You know, maybe the adult is inconsistent with correcting kids when they call out. That creates like this atmosphere or this culture where children don't know what the outcome is going to be from moment to moment. Maybe they'll be corrected, maybe they won't be corrected. So think about on your own, what are some examples of problems of practice? But remember, it has to be focused on an outcome that you don't want, and it has to be rooted in something that adults are doing or are not doing. And that's it. So that's it on the slides. I don't know why I stopped sharing. But as we think about the action plan that we're going to be doing, and I'm gonna share that in a second. I think I have the template in here. Let me see if I can pull it up. If we think about the problem in practice that we're going to be exploring at our own sites, where is it? We're going to be identifying something that has an outcome that we don't like and something that we can change based on the data. Here it is. So this is not open yet, but I might open it up so that y'all can see what it looks like. Okay, this is not the template that I wanted. That's why it's not open. No, but what do I want? Okay, so I don't have it ready for y'all, but it's a very short file, and basically, maybe it's here in my things right here. Let me see. I guess I don't have it on this particular computer. Oh, I do have it. Okay, wonderful. All right. So the action plan is really easy, right? So you're gonna have a focus because we're talking about school and society. It's gonna be based on equity. You're gonna have a focus. You're gonna have a goal, no more than two. You're gonna talk about how you're gonna measure it, and it's gonna be rooted. You're gonna do an exploration in your school site. It's been rooted in your own personal data, and you're gonna write about it, and then you're gonna do a presentation on it, right? So the complete plan should be no more than a couple of pages. I think I say 3 to 5, but it's because there's some written narrative parts to it. But for example, your equity focus is low income students. And your goal is to increase the number of low income students who are performing at or above grade level proficiency. Because when you look at your test score data, whether it's Ames Web, whether it's something else that you map scores, whatever you're using, um, you happen to notice when you break down, disaggregate the data, that your low income students are performing under like maybe the state average, right? So your evaluation, your measure of success is by spring 2025, the percentage of low income students scoring at or above grade level proficiency on iReady reading assessment will increase by 15%. And you throw everything at that, right? And that's an example of like a equity type of goal that you're going to think about for your particular school setting. You're going to look at some data. We'll walk through it in the next couple of weeks. As we like do our readings and understand like the background of each of these identities that we're going to be looking at and why we need to be thinking about it and why data is disaggregated by social identity, because our society is disaggregated by social identity. And then we're going to think about how we can improve education for all students in your building. And I don't want to go too much into that because I am going to do a separate recording on that, but I do want to at least let you know, for example, and make sure I publish it so you can look at it and start thinking about it. All right. So Julie had
I
a, oh, go ahead.
something. So even with that goal there, you'd have to define what is the parameters of low income to really get accurate data. You'd have to say low income and then define what low income is
Yep.
to then really get the accurate data collected to make sure that you're doing everything correctly because that's pretty subjective just to say low income,
Right.
for that way. So just as a, watch out for that, I
No,
guess.
that's exactly right. And I'm glad you brought that up because in the coming weeks, we're definitely going to be talking about basically the parameters that we use are whatever the state tells us. Right. And so we're going to talk about like the ways in which our states tell us who is low income and who is not, who is a student with a disability and who is not, right? Things like that. So we really go off of what the state says, and a lot of times that information, when you pull your test scores, is readily available. I know I've looked at spreadsheets across the state, and it'll be like low income test scores, student with disability test scores, white students, Hispanic students, Black students, like they break it down for us really easy. I don't know in the state of Indiana how readily accessible that data is from the State Board of Education. Um,
If you, I can know for a previous class, might have been your class even last time. I know I did a just a search, basically a Google search for your corporation and test scores, and it did a good job of really breaking it down into different categories. So the information is pretty readily available out there.
that's good because they also do the grading and stuff like that. So yeah, so we're gonna look at that. We're gonna think about our school as an organization. We're gonna think about the leadership framework, and we're gonna think about if we were a school leader, how would we lead this change, this thing that we're focusing on, whether it's SES, special education. And I keep saying special education because I know that's your area. But whatever it is, right? Maybe it's increasing the number of boys who are graduating because boys are not graduating from high school at numbers that we've seen in previous years, right? Whatever it is, any goal is a good goal, but it's going to be rooted in like your own personal like values. So we're going to be doing a lot of research on and reflection on who we are as leaders. We're going to come up with like a little mission and a vision statement for ourselves that guides our work. And then we're going to come up with some equity focused goals. And it's all hypothetical unless you really want to implement it. So if you really want to implement it, then you have like a literal document and presentation at the end of the semester that you can share with someone in power, whether it's your building leader or your superintendent or something like that. And that can be something that you can lead. And if you continue on next semester, you can build on top of it and it could become your action plan towards for the end of this program. So that's the way I'm thinking about it. Like, how can we use the work in this class to build on to the work that we're going to be doing, not only just for this program, but continuous improvement as a school leader. And the more you do it, the more you do it. know? So that's what makes it great. But I wanted to share your problem of practice, and thank you so much for dropping in the chat for everyone else to hear. You said your problem of practice is students with disabilities are not making adequate progress in reading comprehension due to inconsistent use of explicit instructional strategies across classrooms. Teachers are not consistently using formative assessment data to adjust instruction during lesson. Like that's a classic. Like, is this something that's really happening, or is this something you grabbed from someplace else?
No, that stuff really happens. Not everyone knows how to use that information and adjust as needed.
That's real. I've seen this so many times, like so many times, right? So, well, what'll happen is that if you don't understand truly the nature of a problem of practice, you'll say there's something wrong with the kids. And you'll throw all of these resources and time and energy, even money at like, we've got to move the kids when it's something like and this is something you won't necessarily know unless you observe. If you observe the teachers and you can say, hey, teachers are not consistently using formative assessment data to adjust instruction during lessons. Like your problem of practice for everybody has to be something that you have to dig in and you don't know the answer. You might have a hunch of what the answer might be, but you got to do some research. And research doesn't always look like going to the library and looking at a research study. It might be some observations, conversations, digging through data. It's a lot of different ways. And like I said, that's why the action plan is so short and simple because it's just a very small cycle of improvement because it's just this one semester. So that's all I have for you all today. I thought for some reason that it was going to be a little bit longer, but for your readings, make sure that you read or at least look over. I included, make sure I go to the student view so y'all can't see my mess behind the scenes. Um, I included the, oh, it's not open. was open up tomorrow, I think. But this school, the school improvement paradigm, right? So that'll open up. It should be open already. I thought I opened it up last week, but let me just make sure it's open now. And if something's not open, y'all let me know so I can open it up. 'Cause I have all this stuff here, but I don't always know what y'all can or can't see. I guess you have to like finish your stuff in module week 2 to get to week 3. Julie, were you able to get to week 3?
No, it's kind of a you have to do one before you do the other before the one
Hmm.
opens up. So it's not
Okay.
opened up
All
yet.
right. All right. So I just want to make sure. I know that's how I said it. So I just don't want people to be overwhelmed with work and to work at your pace. And if you happen to go through it fast, good. And if you go through it slow, that's fine too. But not so fast because I want everybody like to do all the work at the same time, like kind of at the same time. So the critical reflections are due in a couple of days, like Sunday. So hopefully people have been working on it. Like if you've done like week 2 and you're into week 3, and your critical reflection is just my chance for me to get to know you all as future leaders and current leaders, some of you. And you're basically going to talk about like how your leadership journey has come about and has been influenced by the different leaders that you've encountered in your life. And you're going to think about your own social identities. Um, if you were raised in the church like me, you was put in leadership positions almost from day one. You had to, because that's what your grandmother said. And so that definitely influenced your view on leadership. I'm interested in knowing those things about you. And this is another assignment that is just complete or incomplete. It is not for points because I can't grade your life, right? So the other assignments were for feedback. Like I said in the announcement, I'm going to go through those and give you feedback. Um, and then the critical self-reflection, there won't be feedback. There might be comments like, "Oh, that's really interesting," and things like that. But I can't give you feedback on your life. That's your life. So thank you. It'll probably be like, "Thank you for sharing." And don't feel like you have to share like intimate parts of your life. This is literally just about your leadership story and how you got here based on the things you've experienced in your life and hopefully the leaders who've influenced and inspired you to want to be a leader. So that's all I have for y'all today. And we made it through and everything was recorded. And so we're going to be able to post this for people who weren't able to make the live. This really helps me again to keep this class organized and things being rolled out in a timely fashion. So again, feel free to join. You can comment like Julie did last week. I forgot who joined, but he commented. Um, you don't have to, but it just does help just keep this class kind of rolling along. So thank you so much for joining us this week, and I will see you again next week on the next live. Take care.